We are counting down to the UK election, taking a closer look at one of its biggest issues for voters, the ongoing cost of living crisis. A YouGov polling from June showed it as topping the list as the single most important issue of the upcoming election, beating out health, general economic issues, and immigration. Various factors have impacted the UK economy since the last general election in 2019. The shock of the COVID-19 pandemic and the continuing impact of Brexit caused economic pain. Consumers saw bills skyrocket due to the global surge in energy and food prices, largely triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That pushed inflation up to a more than 41-year high of 11.1% in late 2022. And that was a picture that current PM Rishi Sunak inherited when he took over the job from Liz Truss. Last month, inflation in the UK finally fell in line with the Bank of England's target of 2%. But even as on-year pressures drop, prices still remain.
Rishi Sunak has always said that he wanted to see inflation return to target. However, because there are still cost of living pressures on many consumers, particularly those on the poorest levels of society, I don't actually think it's really going to move the polls that much.
As annual inflation falls, calls for a rate cut have increased. The Bank of England has held rates at a 16-year high of 5.25% for the past 8 meetings. This is because inflationary pressures are likely to continue throughout 2024, no matter which party is in government, with services inflation and wage growth both remaining significantly above the level desired by monetary policymakers.
For more insights, we are joined now by Ben Wellings. He's Associate Professor of Politics and International Relations at Monash University. Good morning, Professor Wellings. Can I start by asking you whether the UK is starting at least to come out of this cost of living crisis, given that we know headline inflation has fallen to 2% and the most recent number, the shop price inflation, also falling in June?
Good morning. Yeah, well, I suppose if we look at those figures and those trends are sustained, then we would say maybe it's heading in the right direction. Of course, the question is whether that's enough to register with voters, or whether they've made up their mind already about who they want to form government or who they don't want to form the next government. So you could say that these figures should be good for Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party, but again, it might be a little bit too late, really, to change the direction of the outcome in any significant way.
Right. Just following up on that, central banks, they are supposed to be independent of the government. Still, the Bank of England is keeping interest rates at a 16-year high of 5.25% there. That is not exactly making things easier for Britons. How could this affect the votes then for either side? Presumably worse for Conservatives, because it looks like, those higher costs are here to stay no matter what.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Of course, the Bank of England is independent of government, but it's got its own, has to respond to the economy in the way that it sees best, and then the political parties have to respond. So I think that the last 2 years of Conservative government under Rishi Sunak, the kind of cost of living crisis will adhere to his reputation and his time in government. But I think if we look at an aggregate of the polls, when things really went off the rails for the Conservative Party was back in 2022. And that was a combination first of the Partygate scandal under Boris Johnson, where he and his advisors were seen to have flouted, or in fact it was decided by the police that he had flouted the rules that he set for everyone else, and that we can trust in the Conservative government in particular. But also Liz Truss's intervention, along with Kwasi Kwarteng and that mini budget that did so much to scare not just voters but the city and the Bank of England. So the polls really headed in Labour's favour and away from the Conservatives in that autumn 2022, and they haven't really shifted since then. So I think the damage was done, particularly with Liz Truss, when the Conservatives lost their reputation for competent economic management.
So, Prof. Wellings, too late for Rishi Sunak, so presumably the next government will be Labour, headed by Keir Starmer. I mean, what do we know about his plans to fight this cost of living crisis? And in reality, does he have a lot of room to move, given that we know he cannot boost spending all that much?
Thanks, Arnold. I'm going to issue my usual caveat about the polls. The polls can exaggerate all sorts of support, and a lot of the seats will come down to some sort of quite very local issues in particular constituencies. But nonetheless, the consensus of the polls is that there will be a Labour government with some kind of a majority, either a workable one or a really, really massive historic one. So, but you're absolutely right. There is limited room for manoeuvre for the government, and it seems to, for the Labour Party, and it seems to have put all its eggs in the growth basket. Now, quite how it's going to do this in the situation that it has at the moment is unclear. Where it's scaled back, and this of course means that, you know, if it wanted to boost growth, it might want to change relations with its major trading partner, the European Union, but that comes with some political risks. It also means a growth agenda rather than a green growth agenda, although Keir Starmer and the team around him are insistent that these two are not mutually exclusive. The Labour Party has in its commitments scaled back from funding new green energy initiatives. It is actually setting up something called GB Energy, which is to be a nationalised green energy provider. But the fact remains is that there's not a lot of money to play around with. And if we think that back to the last time Labour came into government in 1997 under Tony Blair, that was in some quite good economic wins. And the distinction is quite marked. And I think that the kind of pessimism that the electorate seems to feel in the United Kingdom will carry over into the next 6 months of the year.
Yeah, and Prof, as you said, you know, details are scant about what Labour is going to do. But Keir Starmer, he says he wants to achieve growth rate of at least 2.5%. Some say this is very ambitious. Are Labour's current plans sufficient to get them there? And what happens if they don't?
Well, I think that if they are ambitious plans. The detail is scant, and that's partly the election strategy because this is an election where it seems that the electorate would like to vote the Conservatives out, perhaps more than endorse the Labour Party. Of course, the Labour Party is the main vehicle for this, but the Liberal Democrats and Reform UK are also taking votes away from the Conservatives. But so Labour's tried to really minimise the where it could be attacked, if you like, during the election campaign and present a small target. So it does remain to be seen where this growth will come from, how it will be stimulated. And I think perhaps the scale of the victory might open up some political possibilities that have been otherwise difficult. So I mentioned relations with the European Union. Well, the Labour Party would like to improve the UK's relations with the European Union after Brexit. And that would obviously be one of those things that could generate growth. But it needs to do so in a way that would not scare those people who voted to leave the European Union that Labour is just determined to get back in. And of course, the European Union wouldn't be all that thrilled or keen on that anyway. So it's not just about what the United Kingdom wants. So it is difficult to see, where Labour will go. Keir Starmer has promised to hit the ground running and before Parliament goes into a recess, probably in August. That we might see more policies rolled out in that moment than have been during the election campaign, which doesn't seem to have shifted voters' opinions all that much.
Prof. Wellings, we do have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts this morning. Ben Wellings is Associate Professor of Politics and International Relations at Monash University.